Okay, welcome back to Tom Kennedy Science. Continuing on with my lectures in bio for health sciences. And if you're following along, we're in chapter 2. And this lecture is on how life interacts with this environment. This is ecology, right? Because all living things live in an ecosystem, including humans. We live with other species and we live in a physical environment and we interact with both other species and our physical environment. So our lecture topics today are going to be ecosystems. We're going to talk a lot about energy flows because those are really important. And of course, nutrient cycling and food webs. So we're going to talk about how energy is important for nutrient cycling and how energy and nutrients kind of move between organisms in an environment or in an ecosystem, I should say. We're going to look at the importance of productivity in an ecosystem and its relationship to diversity. And then I'm going to follow up with our dependence on ecosystems. And this is really important, even in a health sciences class, because we're not isolated from other organisms or our ecosystems. We are part of this earth, and what we do to it affects it, which in turn affects us as well. Okay, this is just a fact of nature. All organisms live in ecosystems. Just said that. We must interact with our environment, both the things that are alive, both the things that are living, and the abiotic environment as well, which is like the physical environment, which includes the soil, the water, and things like that. And these are long-billed dowitchers, and I videoed them at the beach, and they're going along trying to probe around in the sand looking for small invertebrates and stuff. Now, when it comes to energy, most ecosystems depend on the sun for our input of energy. There are ecosystems on this planet that do not require any input of energy from the sun. None. Those are chemosynthetic. We know they are found in certain regions of the deep sea and maybe parts of underneath the ground where we live. Don't know yet. We're still working on what's going on with those ecosystems. But for most of us, including humans, we get our energy from the sun, and that's really important. And the sun provides energy, and energy flows through our ecosystems. Energy flows through life as well. Kind of sounds like the Force, doesn't it? The Force flows through a Jedi. Well, the Force flows through life, flows through ecosystems. And importantly, one of the things that an input of energy does is it keeps nutrients cycling. You see, of course, we need water, and we need oxygen, we need carbon and nitrogen and phosphorus and a few other minerals and nutrients. And it's energy that keeps those things constantly flowing. If we didn't have a constant supply of energy, a lot of those nutrients, like carbon, for example, would just become unavailable to us. It would be locked up in rocks or in carbon dioxide, and it's plants that take that energy and sunlight and use it to actually make carbon available to us. So while energy cannot be recycled, and we know this because of the laws of thermodynamics, energy, every time you use it, is going to become degraded as entropy increases, which is this measure of disorder. Basically, you use energy, it just becomes less usable for us to use. That sounds great. Less usable for us to use, right? But elements and nutrients, they can be cycled over and over and over again. So carbon, I have a whole video on carbon. Carbon is like 5 billion years old or older. We don't even know how old some of it is. At least 5 billion years old. Some of it could be like 10 billion years old. But at any rate, it's energy. That carbon is removed out of an inorganic reservoir like carbon dioxide or rocks. It gets weathered, and then the energy in plants is used to take that carbon dioxide, fix it into organic molecules, and then we respire it back out as carbon dioxide. But because this carbon's been recycled over and over and over again, guess what? You have carbon atoms in you that were in a dinosaur that lived, I don't know, 170 million years ago. Isn't that wild that you could have the thing that you have carbon in you and water and phosphorus and iron and sodium and potassium and oxygen in you that were in dinosaurs that lived and died hundreds of millions of years ago. Now, I've talked about this photosynthesis. So as energy enters in ecosystems, it comes in from sunlight, right? It's plants, and they capture some of that energy through photosynthesis and they store it as sugars. So think about this. Plants are taking energy, carbon dioxide and water, and they're making carbohydrates, releasing oxygen as a byproduct. Now, this is important because plants are making both carbon along with other nutrients and energy available to everything else in the ecosystem, which is kind of cool. So, how does nutrients and energy flow from the sun to plants on upwards? Well, we look at them as a very simplified way as a food chain. Now, food chains are great because they're just really simplified ways of looking at something, at these nutrient energy flows. So energy is coming in as a sunlight. The producers take that energy, less than 10% of it, and convert that to sugars and store it there. Then some herbivore, here's a beetle eating a plant, is going to eat that plant, and only 10% of the energy stored in that plant will be utilized by that beetle. And if an insect comes along and eats an herbivore, once again, most of that energy is lost. Up to 90% of energy is lost at each of these feeding levels. And so the carnivores, they're getting 1% of that energy that had come in from the producers. That's a lot of energy lost. That's why plants are really abundant in terrestrial ecosystems, and herbivores are less common, and predators are even more rare. Now, we're not going to get into marine ecosystems because they're a little bit different. But here's the point. Plants make energy and nutrients available to all ecosystems. They are the producers. They are the foundations of our ecosystem. And think about this, right? Every carbon atom in your body, we are carbon-based life forms, right? So every organic molecule in your body that's got carbon in it, well, wait, all organic molecules have carbon in them, was fixed by a plant using sunlight and water and carbon dioxide. So every carbon in you was fixed by a plant into an organic molecule and made available. Not only that, all the energy that you have inside your body, guess what? Also fixed by a plant in photosynthesis. So the importance of plants, the producers, we just really cannot understate that. Now, you and I and every other animal are consumers. There are photosynthetic animals, actually, but that's a topic for another day. All right. Elysia chlorotica. It's a sea slug. It has chlorophyll. All right. But at any rate, we're consumers. Animals are consumers, and we get our nutrients and energy by eating other things. And consumers can be herbivores, carnivores, decomposers, and they can also be omnivores as well. Now, basically, herbivores eat plants. And this is a caterpillar eating a leaf. And I took that photo when I was in Ecuador. Gosh, it's been 15 years, in 2009. Now, you also have predators or carnivores. And carnivores eat other animals. This is a really cool bird. I can't believe I saw this. I had no idea they could do this. That is a bird called a long-billed curlew. And look what it's eating. It's eating a crab. And what it did is it actually pulled the claws off the crab, swallowed the crab, and it's got a gizzard, which is like, imagine a stomach with a big, powerful muscle that will grind that crab that went down alive, will grind it up and pulverize it. And then that bird, that long-billed curlew, is then going to go along and it's going to eat the claws of that crab. But it is a carnivore. It's a predator. You and me, well, some of us are vegetarians, or some of you guys are vegetarians or vegans, and that's okay. If you're a vegan or a vegetarian, you're basically only eating animal products. But in general, humans are omnivores. We eat both plants and animals. And depending on your last meal, you could be an herbivore, right? Or you could be a carnivore, and you could be a consumer, and you could be a secondary, tertiary, or even quaternary consumer, depending on what kind of meat you ate. If you ate a cow, which is very different from eating salmon, salmons are much higher up in the food chain than a cow. But we're omnivores. We eat both plants and animals. And you can tell by our teeth. They're really a mixture of molars for grinding, and we don't have much of canines anymore for eating meat, but we eat more plant material than animal material. Okay, and of course, that's my friend Eric shot. We were in Panama. Oh, that picture's old. I know I get nostalgic here, but that was from 2008, and I was just back in Panama, back in August of 2024, and we're eating pizza, the perfect omnivore diet because it's got cheese and bread and everything in it, and some pepperoni. Yeah, not the healthiest thing, but when you've been working in the field a lot, it's really nice to have. Okay, so we've got our consumers, our producers. We also have decomposers as well. And decomposers are largely microorganisms, but if you've ever left something in your refrigerator for longer than you should have, and you have mold growing over it, you get some science fair project going on, those are decomposers. And what they're doing is they're breaking down organic matter and they release that back into the ecosystem. So decomposers are very important. Now, when it comes to these food chains, always remember that on terrestrial ecosystems, carnivores and consumers in general are more rare than the producers because of so much energy is lost as you go up the food chain. And when I was in Kenya, I saw these lions. They were eating a wildebeest. It was pretty cool. Now, food chains are a very simplistic feeding relationship. It just goes from producer to a herbivore to a predator. But the reality is the feeding relationships within an ecosystem are very complicated. And we represent these as food webs, which shows, wow, they can be way more complicated, even this photo right here, because a single organism might change its diet based on its age, time of year, what's going on. So you think about a caterpillar. You know, a caterpillar feeds on leaves as a caterpillar, and then as an adult is feeding on nectar, so it totally changes its food source. Some birds might eat seeds in the fall and winter, and then in the spring when they start to nest, they're eating insects. Or they might change their food source seasonally. Bears early on in the season in the summer might be eating lots of berries. And then when the salmon start running in the fall, they might switch to eating salmon, and calves, like elk calves, in early summer. So food webs are incredibly complex, showing all the different feeding relationships within an ecosystem. Now, ecosystems have a property called net primary productivity. Now, if you've ever watched your grass grow in the summer, or you've watched a tree or any plant grow, that is representative of net primary productivity. What's happening is this is the amount of biomass produced by plants minus what's used for respiration. And as they're adding biomass, they're adding carbohydrates, so they're also adding energy to the ecosystem as well. And in general, the higher the net primary productivity, the higher the diversity. And so when we go to the tropics, we see the highest net primary productivity. And as you probably well know, the tropics are really diverse. And then as you go north or southward from the tropics, net primary productivity kind of falls off and we get less and less diversity. So a temperate deciduous forest has high net primary productivity in the summertime. I mean, it rivals a rainforest. And same with abundances. But because it freezes in the wintertime, net primary productivity stops. Lots of things can't handle the freezing. Guess what? They have less diversity, and then alpine tundra has even less diversity than temperate forest. Now, this is important because we produce 90% of our food in temperate regions, which means we don't grow much during the summertime unless we're moving down south, into the tropics. And most of our food comes from grassland ecosystems, which is quite interesting. Now, we depend on ecosystems for a lot of reasons. You like green chili, strawberries, cantaloupe, squash? I don't really care for squash that much. But all of these fruits, some of them we call vegetables like tomatoes and squash, cucumbers, they're actually fruits. They don't set seed unless some insect has pollinated them. So even the majority of our food crops are in ecosystems that depend on diversity to grow our crops, to grow all of our fruits and vegetables, which is pretty interesting. So that is one way that we completely depend on our ecosystems. Another way, and this is hard. I love meat. I grew up hunting and fishing my whole life. I still like salmon. I like to eat cows. I like animals, but I've really cut back on how much beef. I don't hardly ever eat beef anymore. The reason why is a high price of cattle. You see, as you go up in feeding levels, you lose a lot of energy. So for 8 billion people to eat a lot of meat, well, guess what? Most of our crop production, if a lot of it goes to feeding cattle, then we spend a lot of nutrients and energy and time and resources feeding those cows. And for instance, a pound of beef takes like 1,850 gallons. For me, that's like 4 days of hauling water for one burger, right? That's a lot. And also, if you eat a lot of beef, it's not good for your health. The amount of water and energy we require to make beef is incredible. And also, there's like several billion cows in this world that's led to all kinds of problems of clear cutting and environmental degradation. So I'm not saying don't eat beef, but it's hard, right? You gotta do what you gotta do for what is your own values. I can't tell you what your values are, but there is a high price of cattle, and it's one of those things that to make an informed decision of what you do, you should know that. So these are ways that we're connected to our ecosystems. And one last thing that's interesting. Recent studies have come out and have shown that a walk in the woods or a walk out in nature can actually improve your mood. So that is yet another way that we are dependent on healthy ecosystems. In addition to our crops and clean air and clean water, can also improve your mood as well. All right. Hope you got something out of this.